New Orleans has always had a reputation for being one of the most haunted cities in America. I never really believed in ghosts, but after what I experienced at the Bourbon Orleans Hotel, I can't explain things any other way. It happened 3 years ago. I was visiting New Orleans for a work conference, and my company had booked me a room at the Bourbon Orleans Hotel. I didn't know anything about its history at the time. I just thought it was another fancy old building in the French Quarter. The moment I stepped inside, though, something felt off. The lobby was beautiful. Chandeliers, polished floors, a long staircase leading up to the rooms. But the air was heavy, like the place was holding its breath. I chalked it up to old architecture and went to check in. I got room 644. It was on the 6th floor, down a long, dimly lit hallway. I remember thinking it felt unusually cold for New Orleans, even with the AC off, but I ignored it and went about my night, grabbing dinner and walking around the quarter. I didn't get back to my room until almost midnight, and that's when the weird things started happening. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It hit me the second I walked in, a faint scent of roses and candle wax, the kind you'd smell in an old church. It didn't make sense. I hadn't noticed it before. I checked the room, making sure no one had been inside while I was gone. Everything looked normal. But then, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard it. Soft footsteps in the hallway. I froze, listening. They weren't normal footsteps. They were light, almost delicate, like someone barefoot was walking slowly past my door. I glanced at the peephole. Nothing. I waited a few more seconds, then went back to brushing my teeth. Then, something knocked on my door. Not loud, not frantic, just 3 soft, deliberate taps. I swallowed hard and checked the peephole again. No one was there. I stood there, staring, waiting for something to happen. Then, just as I was about to turn away, another knock. This time it came from inside my room. I felt my stomach drop. I slowly turned around, scanning the room. It was empty. But then I saw it. The closet door was open. I was sure I had closed it earlier. Positive. I stared at it, feeling that cold, heavy air settle around me again. I don't know why, but I stepped forward and pulled the door shut, almost like I was afraid of seeing what was inside. I locked it, then got into bed, telling myself it was nothing, just my imagination. I barely slept. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of whispers. Not just one voice, several. It was faint, like a group of women murmuring prayers, just below hearing level. I sat up, my heart pounding. The whispers weren't coming from the hallway. They were inside my room. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and scanned the room. Empty. But then, I noticed something. The closet door was open again. Wide open. And standing in the doorway was a figure. A woman. She was dressed in a long, dark nun's habit, her face pale, her eyes empty. She didn't move, didn't blink. She just stood there, staring at me. Then, she stepped forward. I scrambled out of bed, backing up against the wall. My phone slipped out of my hand, and for a second, the room went dark. When I picked it up and turned the light back on, she was gone. But the whispers hadn't stopped. They grew louder, more urgent, and then, clear as day, I heard one of them say, "You shouldn't be here." That was it for me. I grabbed my bag and bolted. I didn't care that it was 3 a.m. I left the hotel and booked another room down the street. The next morning, I told the front desk what had happened. The receptionist just gave me a knowing look and said, "You were on the 6th floor, weren't you?" That's when I learned the history of the hotel. Before it was a luxury hotel, the Bourbon Orleans was a convent and orphanage. In the 1800s, a yellow fever epidemic swept through New Orleans, killing dozens of children and nuns. They say their spirits never left. Guests on the 6th floor have reported seeing shadowy figures, hearing whispers, and waking up to find their doors or closets mysteriously open. Some even claim to have seen nuns walking the halls at night, only to vanish when approached. I don't know what I saw that night, but I do know one thing. I'll never stay there again. I've always been fascinated by old hotels, especially ones with history. So when I had a chance to stay at the Hotel Chelsea in New York, I jumped on it. It was supposed to be a quick trip, 3 nights in the city for work. I knew the hotel had a reputation. Famous writers, artists, and musicians had lived and died there. Some even said it was haunted. I didn't believe in that kind of thing. But after my stay, I do now. I checked in late on a Sunday night. The lobby still had that old-world charm. Dim lighting, velvet chairs, oil paintings staring down from the walls. The elevator creaked as it carried me up to my room on the 8th floor. The hallways were eerily quiet. I remember thinking it felt too empty. My room was small but nice. Vintage furniture, tall windows overlooking the city. I set my bags down, got into bed, and scrolled through my phone for a bit before drifting off. And that's when the knocking started. Soft at first. 3 slow knocks on the wall behind my bed. I figured it was just a noisy neighbor. The walls were probably thin. Then, 3 more knocks, but this time, they came from the closet. I sat up, my heart suddenly pounding. The closet door was closed. I stared at it, trying to convince myself I had imagined the sound. Maybe the pipes were knocking. Maybe it was the building settling. Then, the doorknob turned, slowly. I grabbed my phone and flicked on the flashlight, aiming it at the closet door. It wasn't moving anymore. I got up, hesitated, then yanked the door open. Nothing. Just an old wooden rod, a few wire hangers swinging gently. The air inside smelled faintly of cigarettes, like someone had smoked in there decades ago. I closed it, locked it, and told myself I was being paranoid. But that was only the beginning. I barely slept that night. The whole time, I had this awful feeling like someone was in the room with me. The next morning, I asked the front desk if someone had stayed in my room recently. The woman hesitated, then shrugged. "This building has a long history," she said. "Strange things happen sometimes." She wouldn't say anything else. That night, things got worse. I was lying in bed, reading, when I noticed something in the reflection of the TV screen. A shape, standing near the closet. I turned my head. Nothing was there. But in the TV's reflection, I still saw it. A tall figure, unmoving. I grabbed my phone, trying to take a picture, but the moment I lifted the camera, the TV flickered off. The room went dead silent. Then, whispering, right next to my ear. A woman's voice, too faint to make out the words, but urgent, desperate. I shot out of bed and flipped on every light in the room. My hands were shaking. The whispering stopped, but the air felt thick, like something was still there, watching me. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I did some research. Turns out dozens of people have died in the Hotel Chelsea. Writers, painters, musicians. Some from overdoses. Some from suicide. Some under mysterious circumstances. One of the most famous was Nancy Spungen. She was found stabbed to death in room 100 in 1978, rumored to be killed by her boyfriend, Sid Vicious. But others, less famous artists and writers, had lived and died in those rooms too. And many guests reported the same things: knocking sounds, whispers, figures standing in the corners of rooms. Some even claimed to wake up feeling like someone was sitting on their chest, pressing the air out of their lungs. That last part stuck with me, because on my final night, that's exactly what happened. I must have drifted off around 3 a.m., completely exhausted. But at some point, I woke up feeling wrong. The room was pitch black, and I couldn't move. I tried to sit up, but something was holding me down. Then, the whispering started again. But this time, I understood the words. "Get out." It was right in my ear. The weight lifted, and I gasped for air, scrambling out of bed. I grabbed my stuff, barely even stopping to put my shoes on, and ran. I checked out before sunrise and caught an early flight home. I don't know what I encountered in that room, but I do know one thing. Something is still living in the Hotel Chelsea. I was in St. Pete Beach for a weekend getaway. The Don Cesar, nicknamed the Pink Palace, was one of the nicest hotels in the area, and I figured it would be a good place to relax. I didn't know much about its history when I checked in, other than the fact that it was an old luxury resort from the 1920s. The first thing I noticed about the hotel was how empty it felt. Not physically. It was fully booked, but something about it just felt hollow. The hallways stretched long and silent, and even though the place was beautiful, there was a weird, heavy stillness in the air. I shrugged it off and went to my room. Room 411. The moment I stepped inside, I felt a chill. I checked the thermostat. It was off. The AC wasn't running, but the room was cold. Again, I brushed it off. Old buildings have drafts, right? That night, I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it. A knock. At first, I thought it was someone at my door, but when I sat up and listened, I realized it was coming from inside my room. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, coming from the closet. I felt my stomach drop. I stared at the closet door, my breath caught in my throat. It was closed. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. Slowly, I got out of bed and walked over. I hesitated, then grabbed the handle and yanked it open. Nothing. Just empty shelves and a few spare hangers. I told myself I was imagining things, shut the door, and got back in bed. A few minutes later, knock, knock, knock. I felt a cold wave wash over me. This time, I didn't get up. I just lay there, staring at the closet, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I spent most of my time at the beach, trying to shake the weird feeling from the night before. By the time I got back to the hotel that evening, I was exhausted. I fell asleep almost instantly, and then, sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Inside my room, slow, shuffling steps, moving from the closet toward the bed. I held my breath, frozen. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I could feel something there. And then, right by my ear, I heard a man's voice, whispering. It was faint, just a few words I couldn't make out, but the voice was deep and sad, like someone trying to speak from far away. I reached for my phone, shaking, and turned on the flashlight. The room was empty, but the air felt heavy, like someone had just been there. I barely slept after that. The next morning, I packed my bags and checked out early. I didn't want to stay another night. As I walked out of the hotel, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me leave. I told myself I imagined it, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But even now, months later, I still think about it. The knocks, the whispers, the feeling that someone was in the room with me.